What's going on, guys? Welcome back to The Code. Dr. Andrew Fix here. And as you know, I'm from Physio Room. We're here on The Code podcast. And like I say every time, I really appreciate you guys tuning in to listen to this episode and join us for this conversation. We're very excited to bring another awesome interview to you guys. We've got an author and a new connection of mine, David Steinman, joining us. And he is the best-selling author of this book, if you're watching on the YouTube channel, Raising Healthy Kids: How to Protect Your Children from the Hidden Chemical Toxins in Our Everyday Lives. And he's also the chief officer of the nation's most active consumer rights nonprofit, the Healthy Living Foundation. He's joining us from California today. David, thanks for joining me on The Code.
Oh, it's great to be with you today, Andrew.
Yeah, I really appreciate you carving out the time. We've had to do a little bit of rescheduling to make this conversation happen, so I'm looking forward to getting into it with you. And I was just telling you off the air, and many of the folks listening to this probably already know this, but my wife and I are new parents to our almost 7-month-old, 7-month-old, Aiden, as of the recording of this podcast. And this book, when we got connected and I saw the title of this book, I really wanted to have a copy to dive into it myself, because it's very like perfect timing for the stage of life that we're going through. And this kind of conversation in general, like having toxins hidden in the things that we use every day, I think is relevant for everybody. But what I'd love for you to do before we dive into this is just do me and the listeners a favor. And if you could do a more thorough introduction of yourself for us and sort of tell us, how you got to the point where you decided to write this book, and then we'll get going.
Sure, it's great to be here with you. And I wrote Diet for a Poison Planet was my first book.
Okay.
And I wrote that book before there was an organic market.
Mm.
So I've kind of had the opportunity to watch this very young and important anti-toxic movement be born and grow up. And it's very exciting to be part of it. And I consider everyone listening part of it too. And I think one of the main things that I've discovered, and this is thanks to the internet,
Hmm.
is how many victims there are. When I started reporting prior to the internet, before there was an internet, the chemical industry worked by keeping people isolated.
Mm.
In other words, if a woman got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and she used dark hair dyes, and she went to her hairdresser once a month religiously to get her hair dyed, and then she gets lymphoma, she doesn't know that that's being caused by her hair dyes because she has nobody else to talk to, because we
Cool.
were all isolated.
Hmm.
What the internet did was bring together our stories so that we could see, and in this case, a woman who had NHL, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, she could see, oh, there are lots of people who are using hair dyes who are getting sick too.
Mm.
And I think that's one of the things that I've been able to see in the course of my writing and activist career. And in my newest book, Raising Healthy Kids: Protecting Your Children from Hidden Chemical Toxins, I did interview a lot of folks, and particularly families,
Mm.
who are, I hate to use the word victims, but they learned a lot, and these stories are important to tell. Just for example, one family, and this is very relevant to your situation,
Hmm.
they sent their two kids off to preschool, which, you'll may be doing in a few years, and other listeners will be. What they failed to do was check the preschool's drinking water to see what was in it.
Mm.
And now that it's time for us all to send our kids back to school, and even if you work at an office and you're an adult or at home, they didn't know that the preschool where their kids were going to, this was in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, they didn't know that that preschool, the well delivering water to it, had forever chemicals. And their kids ended up getting poisoned by the forever chemicals and had very high levels. So mom has tremendous guilt because she didn't go to the school and she didn't get damaged.
Yeah.
and it's very distressing.
Sure.
So there are just some really simple things that you need to know as a parent or as an adult human being to survive and stay healthy in this world. And so I feel like in many ways, I wrote this book to be like a big brother or a good friend and just say, hey, here are some things I want you to know as you venture into the world, because these are going to make a difference in your life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, it's fascinating. And what's interesting about that is if we don't have things like this book and these stories and whatnot, like you said, the internet kind of bringing people's stories together instead of keeping them isolated to themselves. Um, so much of this is like you don't know what you don't know until you learn some of this for potentially the first time. Like that story you just said about the drinking well, the water from the well, like that mom, that family, she may not even have thought or known that that's something that she should get checked out before sending the kids there. And it may be something that you just assume is good and is the way it should be. And then you find out potentially the hard way that things could have been improved. So I guess as we dive into this book a little bit, without like reading the book for the listeners, I would encourage you to get the book and get a copy of your own. But where do we want to start in terms of like there's toxins that all of us are going to have to encounter or learn how to navigate throughout our lives. And I see in the book here, like some of these things are cleaning products. A lot of these things are food related. What are some of like the major categories, David, of products or of things that we should be paying attention to when it comes to trying to avoid these chemical toxins in the first place?
Food. I start with food.
Mm.
It's so primal. It's so primal. And the nonprofit group for which I'm a chief officer, for example, has done a lot of testing of grain products.
Mm.
Something as simple as bread, for example. Every slice of bread that we've tested has what is known as an organophosphate pesticide in it. The organophosphate pesticides are nerve toxins. They actually inhibit the body's ability to produce an enzyme called cholinesterase that breaks down acetylcholine. And the ingestion of organophosphates, our exposure to them, particularly our kids, and there are also adult consequences too. But for our kids,
Yeah.
it results in a greater risk for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, cognitive loss, IQ loss. In fact, a study that I share in the book was done in Salinas of kids who were exposed to organophosphates during pregnancy. And mom was eating foods with them because most of our non-organic foods, or I should say a lot of non-organic foods, particularly fruits, vegetables, and grains, contain organophosphate pesticides.
Mm.
In the study, what they found was the kids with the highest exposure actually had dead brain cortical tissue. They could see these through imaging. And I would talk to a teacher in the Salinas area where the study was done, and he'd say, sometimes I'm trying to get through to kids and they just kind of give me a look like they just don't get it and can't do it.
Yeah.
Well, if your child's brain is actually damaged and has lost cortical tissue, which is how we think and act with executive power to make decisions, they're going to suffer.
Sure.
And this is a silent thing that is happening to our kids. So whether you live in Salinas or New York City, food is primary. And the big word that I use for your food supply is organic.
Yeah.
And I hear a lot from naysayers, skeptics, and folks like that who will tell me, well, actually, why do you pay more for organic foods? They're not helping you at all. But this is so wrong.
Mm.
Remember when I did my first book, there was no such thing as organic foods legally. But today, over the time since then, studies that are peer reviewed and published have been done comparing kids and adults on an organic diet versus a non-organic diet. And what the published peer reviewed research shows is that kids on an organic diet have fewer cases of cancer,
Mm.
obesity, diabetes, allergies. Mom, when she's on an organic diet, has fewer pregnancy complications. And dad, when he's on an organic diet, has higher sperm counts and better quality sperm.
Yeah, and I think, sorry to interrupt you. I
Sure.
think that's so important too, because one of the other things that we know, and I'm sure a lot of this is a big part of the reason, but along with the other lifestyle things that we have, less sunlight than humans used to get, less sleep than humans used to get, all this time spent in front of screens and things. Um, we know that like our reproducibility as humans is going down because of things like that too. So, um, yeah, and I'm right there with you. I've heard some of those complaints isn't the right word, but like some of the naysayers, like you mentioned, sort of put down the benefits of organic foods compared to non-organic foods.
They'll also say that organic foods are more expensive. Here's the deal. When I wrote Raising Healthy Kids, the new book, I wrote it for people who are on a budget, or
Yeah,
in my own case, and many others who really don't have a budget. We're activists. It's not like we're, working at a hedge fund or anything.
sure.
And I'm very cognizant of food prices. And here's what I have found. You can buy organic foods, particularly the staples like celery, lettuce, potatoes, carrots, apples, um, summer fruit, bread, all for about the same price, if not less, than conventionally sourced.
Mm,
And that's because consumers, I'm sure there's a lot of folks in the audience listening, have made such a huge difference by creating a demand for organic foods, which has increased the number of acres being utilized for organic foods, and which has leveled the price for many organic foods, particularly our staples. There are some foods, though, that are still more expensive. Just to give you an example from my own shopping recently, I found the organic watermelons, which I love, especially when it was hot during the summer, are really a couple dollars more. On the other hand, summer fruit like the plums, the nectarines, and peaches, right now, if they're organic, they're very inexpensively priced because
mm,
they're in season. And the reason why I say organic is my first go-to concept is that once you start thinking about food,
mm.
that leads you to start thinking about other things like you mentioned, cleaning products, cosmetics, everything else. But we center around food.
Yeah.
And that's the big one. And then, from there, you will go on to other areas of your life. And
Yeah.
also, people bring up like, oh, is it genetically modified? Or what about the food dyes, which are really bad. I think, you will find for your kids, and I'm sure you know this, and many of your listeners do, as you clean up your diet and go more towards organic, you're also eliminating a lot of food additives and dyes
Sure. Right.
and artificial sweeteners. You know, I these are really important to get out of your diet as an adult or for your kids. It's if you take care of your kids, you're taking care of yourself.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's nature and nurture.
Yeah.
But the reason why is that organics eliminates the dyes, the GMOs, so you don't really have to worry about these things as much. It's not that organic is perfect. It's not. But the studies show that it's so much cleaner. It will make an enormous difference in your kid's life. And from there, you go on to the other areas.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that. It's like, it's a snowball effect, but in a positive way. You start with the one base being the food, and it's just going to carry over into the other areas of your life. And like you said, I recently saw something posted about type 2 diabetes being something that, somebody had shared something online, and it talks about like, well, this gets passed down in your family. And no, what gets passed down, like you said, are like the habits, and it's the nature and the nurture, and it's the habits and the things that you do as a parent get passed down to your kids, and then that gets passed down to another kids, and things like that are non-hereditary tend to pass through generations of a family, because that's the way we were raised. So, and we say the same thing, in our office about I have this conversation about footwear and toes and bunions and things. Like bunions are not hereditary. The shoes that we wear get passed down, and you tend to wear the same types of footwear that your parents wore and your grandparents wore, and you tend to have similar issues as them. So what about, David, as we sort of centered that conversation around fruit, produce, bread, what about when it comes to things like dairy and meat and some of these other like major staples of our diet?
So one of the key insights into meats and dairy is that many of the most dangerous pesticides accumulate in fatty tissues.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always a good idea to order lean or non-fat when possible. On the other hand, the other problem that we have, particularly with meat, is that almost all the meat sold in the United States is from animals that have been implanted with testosterone or estrogen
Sure.
and so the sex hormones. And these show up in the beef. And we notice, and you've probably seen the studies too, that our daughters are entering puberty at a much earlier age than ever before.
Yeah.
And most researchers attribute this to the modern Western diet, and in particular, exposure to the estrogens in the in our food supply, particularly meat and beef, and the fake estrogens that are so prevalent. Many of the pesticides that we are exposed to actually imitate the sex hormones. Just as an example, DDT, to which we're still exposed, is actually imitates the female hormone estrogen. So I strongly recommend for meats the best way to protect yourself, and I don't take a position on whether you should eat meat or not. I'll leave that to another argument. But if you do, it should be organic whenever possible and or grass-fed.
Yeah.
And these are very important terms. They're not there just to entice you for no reason. But many of the grains that uh, uh, livestock are fed are also contaminated with pesticides.
Right.
And they'll accumulate, again, as I mentioned, in the fatty tissues. So with meats, I think it's really important to get organic and or grass-fed. You'll see that right on the label. What I would also stress are cured meats. And you really want to be wary of eating cured meats. Now, I know from raising 3 kids how much my kids have loved hot dogs, for example.
Sure.
But at an early age, what I was able to do is trick them. And I would start buying tofu hot dogs served with baked beans, organic baked beans. And they never knew the difference. They never cared. But the reason why I did that is most cured meats, not only are they high in sodium, which is bad for, see, if you're feeding these hot dogs to your kids, mom or dad, then you're no doubt eating them too.
Typically
And
best.
that sodium, the sodium levels in these processed foods and cured meats, Andrew, is really high. And I think people don't realize how much havoc sodium alone wreaks in the human for human health. But sodium is linked with hypertension, kidney disease, and so for I would also, and if you're pregnant, cured meats, because they're often cured with nitrite, which forms nitrosamines, which are carcinogenic. Cured meats do cause birth defects, particularly when I say birth defects, what I should say is they're linked with cancer in our children, brain cancer and leukemia. And it's linked to the nitrosamines. So there's another reason to avoid cured meats, and that is that they're just not healthy for you or your pregnancy or your kids.
And just to make sure we're all on the same page and everyone listening, you had mentioned hot dogs. Maybe give us a couple other examples of what some of these cured meats might be.
Sure. Well, I'll just go through all of my past favorites. Salami, oh, bologna, Oscar, bologna,
Yeah.
right? Which is what I went to school with every week. Yeah, I'm okay. I've made it through that stage. But just to tell you a really quick story, um, someone I know, I won't mention their names or anything, I'll keep it anonymous, owned a pizza restaurant,
Mhm.
and they were pregnant, and they used to eat cured meats all the time because they were baking pizza all day.
Yeah.
And the child, one of their kids who was born during this period, died from brain cancer at about age 5.
Mm.
And you don't go to that person and say, well, you shouldn't have eaten so much cured meat. I would never do that. But think about it. And if you're going to have kids or you have kids, substitute those tofu hot dogs. Hot dogs are a big example. As I mentioned, bologna, salami, um, any of the charcuterie meats that are on your board. It could be if pastrami, is another example.
Mm.
How do you think it gets so red? Well, they put a lot of nitrite in that salami. See, they use the nitrite to fight um, bacterial contamination and also to keep the meat looking really fresh and red. Um, but honestly, it's not good for you. Now, some products use what's known as celery seed extract,
Mm.
which is a bit safer because celery seed contains nitrate, but not nitrite. And
Okay.
nitrate has to be converted in the body to nitrite to become carcinogenic. It's a little safer, but to be totally safe, mom and dad, try to get your kids more oriented towards tofu hot dogs and, fresh meat. Grass-fed burgers
Yeah.
are okay, you know. Now, if you're having a cheeseburger and we're going on to dairy, I would try to make your dairy organic too. And that's because non-organic dairy often has antibiotic and other drugs in it that are used to keep the livestock healthy, and it shows up in the milk supply. So there's definitely a reason to go organic for dairy products too. If you can't go organic with dairy products, the next best thing is to go non-fat.
Okay.
So if I were like my kids wanted a dessert, um, they would they will get like non-fat yogurt. Um, and I'll buy, for me, going back to the fruits and vegetables, I'll buy like these big 4-pound packs of frozen bananas and strawberries,
Oh, sure.
which are really quite inexpensive, by the way. Um, you know, I understand fresh strawberries can be, when they're organic, can be, everything is expensive these days.
Yeah.
But, organic strawberries, which are difficult to grow, and my admiration to all farmers, because being a gardener, I know how difficult it is just to grow strawberries or squash. There are so many pests out there. But with the strawberries, I'll buy the 4-pound organic. You can go to your local Kroger, Rouse's, Winn-Dixie. They'll have them in the big frozen packs. Those are very inexpensive, and those are great treats. Your kids will love them. Organic bananas, strawberries, and non-fat yogurt. That's a great treat for kids, and so healthy compared to the candy bars, the
Yeah.
candy and other things
Well, and the thing too is, I think
our
we
kids
all
get
know
from.
that. Yeah, I think we all know that like the more we have of those things, right? The candy bars, the sugary, unhealthy things for us, the more our body is going to want those things anyways. Like the taste and the sugar is going to be like addictive in our body, and that's going to be wreak havoc on our nervous system, first of all. Um, and especially if you can start them at a young age, not having those things, they're going to grow up and develop without the taste for those things as much, right? Because they're
Yeah,
so used to having it. So
totally agree.
yeah, and I don't know what the statistic is. I know it's a larger than we want it to be percentage. About you had just mentioned like these frozen fruits and stuff, frozen organic bananas, strawberries, blueberries, and whatnot. So much of the food that we buy goes in the trash can, right? Like so much percentage of our food goes bad, gets thrown away, doesn't get eaten. And I think that's a great option is if you can have something that's frozen, the shelf life on that is going to be quite a bit better. And in the likelihood of, those berries going bad or whatnot without you actually having the chance to use them is going to be pretty much out the window in a good way.
Well, that's another really big advantage, because if those see, when you buy organic, one thing to be aware of when you buy organic foods, like, okay, you're going to go out tomorrow and buy your organic russet potatoes, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Unlike the conventionally grown russet potatoes that don't sprout,
Yeah.
you've got to put those organic russet potatoes in a dark bag and keep them away from light to prevent the sprouting. But they're going to sprout, so you're going to have to cut away a little bits. And the organic strawberries, because there are no fungicides on them, they may not last as long as the ones that are sprayed with Captan and acephate and carbaryl and other fungicides and pesticides. So, you want to be aware of that, but also frozen really does alleviate that issue. And, and as far as food waste, and you were talking about all these taste, uh, you know, these taste enhancers and excitotoxins
Yeah.
that are part of the additives that we find in so much processed food. Andrew, and you're really right. It may be like the first few days you'll have a craving to go back to the old ways, but after about a week, you're not going to want to go back to the old ways as an adult or as a kid because one, your stomach's going to feel healthier because
Sure.
all these additives and artificial sweeteners, they affect the balance of beneficial bacteria in your gut.
Mm.
And when you stop putting in all these artificial additives and sweeteners and get back to a more wholesome diet, your gut health will improve tremendously. At the same time, your cravings will go down too. And also, you'll start to realize, I feel so much better the next morning because of what I didn't eat.
Yeah.
And you'll also end up losing weight because, again, a lot of, most of the processed food companies are owned by the cigarette companies. They bought them all when cigarettes were being regulated. And the same scientists who knew how to create dependency in a cancer stick were also fooling around with the additives that they could put into food to increase our um, appetite, to excite us to want more of that food. Maybe they oversalted it, as I mentioned, sodium before. And if you look at the foods that are processed, that I'm trying to get you not to buy, and this goes, by the way, for organic foods too. They make one meal, like if you say you're buying Amy's, which is a great organic brand, by the way. And when I want to cheat, Amy's is a go-to food for their mac and cheese, for example, or their enchiladas, and it's a great company. I'm not taking anything away from them, except that if you look at the label, those one meal may supply like 30% of your daily intake for sodium.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of sodium. And so you really want to be careful of processed foods. But the non-organic processed foods will have so many other taste enhancers in them
Yeah.
um, that they kind of make you want to eat more and more. So there are so many advantages. You just got to go through that little withdrawal period as you clean up your diet.
Yeah, I think, well, to your point, I don't know one person that I'm close to that eats in this type of way, right? Eats healthy food, minimally processed, organic, that doesn't feel better than people that are eating the opposite way, right? And I don't know one person, myself included, that as we started, my wife and I, as we started to work away from the more processed foods to the more whole foods, um, we started to feel better too. And I think we could talk about the cost and whatnot, but there's a big difference between the words like cost or price and value. And I think the value that you're getting from these things is significantly higher than the value you're getting from the ultra processed foods, even though in the moment they may be cheaper from the sticker price, but they're cheaper because they're easy to make, right? Like you said, they enhance things to make them taste a certain way to make us want more. And with all these things and some of those studies you referenced earlier, where children, moms, dads are going to have less rates of obesity, cancer, X, Y, and Z, in a way, you're going to get your costs back on the back end by not having to pay for things because you're unhealthy, right? So, like, you'll have less medical costs, for example, because you won't be riddled with the conditions and diseases and things that we've become so like the United States and other very industrialized places have become so known for, because you won't have those things by working your eating and your lifestyle into a way that's more in line with what you're talking about in this book.
It's a more valuable expenditure than your health insurance.
Mhm.
I'm not saying not to have health insurance. That's not what I'm saying. But the bit more that you might spend for organic foods is going to keep you from needing that health insurance.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And I don't want to breeze past that, because like you said, we need health insurance for different reasons, right? Accidents and things do happen. We just went through a birth recently earlier this year. It's nice to have health insurance when you see
Yes,
some
of
of these
course.
bills, because we opted for a in the hospital based delivery. So, anyways, but it's not your health insurance's job. It's definitely not going to be the health insurance organizations and companies that they're not going to do this. It's not your health insurance's job or your doctor's job or anything like that to keep you healthy, right? That's quite frankly just not the way our medical system is set up to operate right now. What we put in our body, what we put on our body, how we take care of ourselves is going to by far and away be the most important factor in like the quality of our life, the quality of our health moving forward. And then the health insurance and the medical system and whatnot is going to be there for when things do come up, for when issues do happen. And we can be very good at treating things. But what our health system is not good at is preventing things from happening in the first place. And that's basically what we're talking about.
Yeah, prevention. And you're right. You know, if we were able to have all the kids eat organic foods,
Mhm.
if we went, and I'm not saying this is possible right now, because it's difficult to grow food. Our farmers, whether they're using pesticides or not, are heroes because it's the most difficult business in the world. Who else has to look at the weather every day?
Mhm.
Just that they wake up. What's the weather like? Do I have enough water? And farming and raising crops is very difficult. But if we were able to put every kid on an organic diet, every parent, here's what we would have in society. We would have fewer cancers, higher birth rate, fewer cases of ADHD. We would have fewer dysfunctional kids who are terrorizing communities. We would have a more sane political system because we'd stop shaving IQ points off our entire future generation. The benefits of prevention are huge.
Yeah.
And yet, we seem to be in a model. Sometimes I feel like I'm um, preaching as a prophet, and I know this is true because I've studied it. But society is built on so many myths and so many selfish interests. For example, government officials and industry, which is very powerful, continually will tell you our food is safe, our water is safe, even if it contains a few parts per billion, say in your drinking water, atrazine and herbicide,
Mhm.
or even if your food contains those organophosphate pesticides, it's safe. They will tell you this is gaslighting. This is gaslighting. Not every kid is hurt by every exposure,
Mhm.
but it's sort of like uh, Russian roulette on a mass scale. Some kids will be hurt, others won't be, but all of society will suffer. When you're exposing every kid in the country to organophosphate pesticides, it isn't just a select few who lose IQ points.
Right.
When every kid is being exposed to a chemical like carbaryl, which may be in the olive oil, and we're in the process of winning a big case against an olive oil manufacturer who is putting carbaryl into their product, and we've stopped it. And this is in California in a court case. Um, you will have higher reproductive rates, higher fertility rates. The benefits of prevention are huge, but we are gaslit, by so many government officials. Um, I know folks, for example, in Cancer Alley, Louisiana, whose drinking water every day has atrazine in it, which is an estrogenic herbicide. Sometimes it has phthalates, benzene, and other chemicals in it. And they are told it's safe for them. But I go to these communities and people are getting cancer in their 50s and 60s. They're
Yeah.
getting colorectal cancer, they're getting kidney cancer, all the cancers you would associate with exposure to chemical toxins. There is so much gaslighting. And what I really urge everyone listening to think about is how you're being lied to by so-called well-intentioned public officials and not so well-intentioned industry officials.
Mhm.
You know, they'll say, oh, we're going to put in a new plastic plant, say in Pennsylvania. You know, there's a big one, the Shell cracker plant went in there, cracks ethane to make plastics. And they'll say, oh, the pollution is minimal. It's not going to impact you. Well, every kid in America now, every boy now has plastic in their testicles. Every kid has plastic in their brains. Pregnant women have plastic in their placenta. And we know from the few studies being done that boys with high amounts of plastic nanoparticles in their genitalia also suffer from infertility. We also know plastics are lessening IQ. When you do this to a whole society, you know, you wonder why America is becoming more and more dysfunctional. I mean, we've always had a dysfunctional portion of society, but you don't want to increase it through artificial means by dumbing down every kid. And that's what we're doing.
Yeah, and while we're on the topic of plastic, and well, I guess let's get back to the plastic in just a minute. I something you said before, I just find so ironic. And you had mentioned that how most of the highly processed food companies are owned by the cigarette companies. And if there's one thing that I think most people, probably everybody listening to this, but most people in general can probably agree on is that we all know cigarettes are not good for us, right? And there's numerous studies and rates of cancer and everything else, probably personal stories that we all know from friends or family to tell us that that is true. And I just think it's so ironic that those companies are the ones that ultimately own a lot of these highly processed food companies. And if there's one piece of something that like should tell you that you probably shouldn't be eating that food, well, you don't have to look very much further than that.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just again, the more unprocessed foods you eat, the healthier you will be.
Yeah.
It may seem like it takes a few more minutes to prepare unprocessed foods because you can't just pop them into the microwave.
Right.
But you know what? You can like you can buy an 8 pack of organic or grass or pasture raised or organic chicken wings, for example. It, you know, you cook them up. The kids will love them. You can give them a little organic ranch dressing or make street tacos with them.
Yeah.
Get some organic sweet peppers. If it's non-processed, like we were getting back to, Andrew, the health dividends are huge. You're going to feel it. You're going to feel it in your gut and your brain.
Yeah, you'll feel so much better. And one of the things about like when something is a whole food, unprocessed, compared to, chips or cookies or candy, any of these highly processed things, like the the neurological response, like the chemical response in our brain and body is so dramatically different, right? Like if you filled yourself up and you ate dinner and you ate your meat and your dairy, your whatever, your produce, and you got yourself to the point where you're full, you wouldn't want any more of that same stuff, right? You wouldn't want any more meat. You wouldn't want any more whatever. But if somebody puts something highly processed in front of you, cookies, cake, dessert, we all somehow find a way to create more room in our stomach that already told us it was full for these things because it's, the way that they're made and the chemicals that they have in them, um, we crave those things.
Oh yeah, yeah. What's that saying? Murder is like potato chips. You can't just eat one.
You cannot just eat one.
It's a very just try controlling your appetite with a bag of Lay's potato chips. You
Yeah.
will devour the bag, I guarantee it.
Yeah.
It's just, that's they're designed to make us want to eat more. They have excitotoxins, taste enhancers. And you're right, after a dinner that's from non-processed organic foods, you're satiated. You feel satiated, and you can go for hours without eating. It's just a very different feeling.
Yeah, totally. Well, we were on the topic of plastic here, and that's something that I've been hearing more and more about, whether it's plastic and something that we're drinking out of, or whether it's plastic containers that we store and house our food and our leftovers and things in. It is so important to try to use as little of that as possible, is it not? Use glassware and everything, as opposed to using plastic, even though it may be cheaper, more convenient, and whatnot.
Oh yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And I always say we're all learning from each other. Just as an example, this summer I really got into cold brew
Oh, sure.
coffee because
Yeah.
and at first I was buying already made cold brew in these plastic containers. And I was feeling really bad about it because I'm quite aware that we need to be cutting down. What I figured out is, you know what? I can get a 64 ounce a carafe with a filter, make my
Mm,
own cold brew, and say goodbye to plastic totally. So uh, we should be cutting down. And again, these things are really good for us, our brains, our reproductive capacity when we eliminate plastic, but they also make a huge difference in other people's lives.
mm,
And I think one of the things I've tried to stress in Raising Healthy Kids, my new book, I have a chapter called Deep Caring. And I've tried to stress that we need to cross over the way that politicians are trying to divide us. They're using culture wars to divide us. They're bringing up issues that um, are dividing us. And we really need our country, and the very fabric of our civic life and our democracy depends on virtue. And you may think, well, I'm not buying as much plastic. That's good for me, but it goes way beyond you. I mentioned Cancer Alley, Louisiana. That's the stretch of the Mississippi River between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. It's about 85 miles with about 200 chemical plants. It's the most industrialized corridor in the Western Hemisphere. And crude oil is brought up from the Gulf of Mexico up the Mississippi River to all of these factories to be distilled into ethylene, propylene, benzene, and other chemicals that are used to make plastic. And when I visit there, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm with the folks there, they're dropping like flies. They're dying.
mm.
When I visit um, there, I share with them, they're all drinking bottled water.
Yeah.
And one of the things my the nonprofit for which I'm chief officer has done is delivered water pitcher filters to them because I found it such an abomination that folks that were buying so much bottled water when all that plastic is being made in Cancer Alley and hurting them. So by cutting down our supply on plastic, we can literally stop new plastic plants from being built in America, and they will be built down there. Um, and they will hurt more of my friends. And these are not just my friends, they're your friends too.
Yeah.
These are American folk, just like you and me. Um, Another example, we were talking about organic foods.
Yeah.
I used to visit Salinas, California, which is called the salad bowl of America, because that's where all the lettuce and strawberries and other crops are grown for the country. And when I would visit there in the early 2000s and mid 2000s, all the schools, which are carved right out of the farm fields, were surrounded by chemically grown crops. You know, the kids would play on one side of the chain link fence, and right on the other side were the crops being sprayed with pesticides.
Hmm.
But when I visited there in just a couple of years ago during the pandemic, the same schools were all surrounded by organic lettuce and strawberry fields.
Hmm.
And that is good for the town and good for the kids. And that happened because of folks like you and me and people listening who were buying all this organic food and creating the market demand. So, um, all the things we're talking about are not only good for our own health, but good for the country and good for our friends and community.
Yeah, and one thing that I know is true, if sometimes if a person doesn't want to do something for themselves, they will often do it for another person. So I like that point that you brought up, because I mean, we we see it in our industry and things, like a parent is more apt to get their kid into the office to see one of us physical therapists than even get themselves in there for something that's bothering them. So like, it's within our nature to obviously care for and try to provide the best life for our children, but also to try and help the people around us. So yeah, I think I like that point. And I didn't even, outside of the kid side of things, I didn't even really think of that, the impact that doing something that's beneficial for us could have on the other people. And at, even if we take that one step deeper, to like a relational standpoint and stuff, well, if you're doing this stuff for yourself, eating organic, taking better care of yourself, quite frankly, you're just going to be a better person to be around. And that's going to be beneficial for the emotions of everyone else you're interacting with on a day-to-day basis as well.
Yeah, you're right.
Totally. Well, one last thing here, David, before we start the process of winding this down. I think so much of what we're talking about and some of the information in this book is probably going to come across to people as like something that, they already know, right? I've heard this. I know it's beneficial to do this. However, that doesn't always mean that that is enough to lead to the change in behavior of purchasing the organic food or changing the soaps or the skin products you use or anything like that. What have you found in your conversations, like tends to be the barrier there, or like what tends to be the thing that finally clicks with people to overcome that hurdle? Because I don't think it will be a shock to people to hear that, like, eating organic meat is healthier for you than eating non-organic meat, for example. But like, how do we actually get it to start carrying forward into the habits and the behavior of all of our friends and family and the folks listening to this episode?
When people discover how many chemical toxins are actually hidden in their consumer products, then they want to know that kind of information. For example, in my book, I share with you um, a lot about cosmetics and cleaning products. And folks maybe think they're buying a green brand and it's really safe for them. And I'll point out that there's a bit of greenwashing. For example, you may be buying um, a product and it's from a very famous green company, but it will contain in the laundry detergent will contain like Laureth 7, or the shampoo will contain sodium myroth sulfate. And I teach you to look for ingredients that are hidden. They're on the label, but they contain hidden toxins. So for example, any ingredient with an ETH in it in your cleaning product or your cosmetics, like sodium lauryl sulfate, will tend to be contaminated with a carcinogen called dioxane.
Hmm.
And this is particularly true for bubble baths, shampoos, and other products we might use ourselves or with our kids.
Yeah.
So it's important for folks to have the tools they need not to be deceived. Because, when you're buying products, if you don't know how you're being fooled, you will be fooled.
Sure.
And there is so much to know about in other areas. Like, for example, what if your child goes to school and they wear a school uniform? Well, did you know if that school uniform is stain or water resistant, it probably has forever chemicals in it, and those chemicals are absorbed from your child's clothing into their body. These chemicals cause infertility, kidney cancer, kidney disease. They shave off IQ points. So there is so much to know. You might think know it all, but no one does. So really, I think what I try to emphasize to folks is there are a lot of things just to learn. Once you read the book, you'll be a black belt in protecting yourself and your children from hidden chemical toxins. But they are hidden. We're often not told about them. So it goes well beyond organic foods.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to give people that information, like the story about the family, with the drinking water at school. Every month, not many parents will think about this, but if you have a kid at school, what's in the school's drinking water? Do you know what's in your kid's drinking water? You should. And then what are you going to do if it has lead in it? Because I share with you how to find out about what's in your school's drinking water. And then I will share, for example, well, what do I do? Well, you get a stainless steel flask, and that's what your kid brings to school to drink from, because you don't want them drinking lead contaminated water.
Right.
But what parent thinks about, oh, I need to find out what's in the water at my school? Or what parent thinks about those fluorescent lights in my kid's classroom? Are they leaking PCBs? How can I tell? So there's a lot that we don't know, and that's what I'm trying to bring out in the book.
Yeah, I think having these types of conversations and spreading this information out there is so important because of what you just said. We just don't know these things, and there are many people, these companies and things, that benefit in a financial way by us not finding out this information. So, somebody like yourself, we have to dig for this information and spread it to people so that we can actually start implementing these changes in our life. And I think it would be a really, really long podcast episode if we were able to dive into the weeds throughout this entire book. So I encourage you guys to pick up a copy for yourself. We'll have all the information to obtain it linked in the show notes. But David, before we sign off, I want to make sure you get a chance to share with everybody that's listening, like, what would be the best way to get in contact with you or find some of your information out there online?
You can visit the website raisinghealthykidsthebook.com, and you can put in, and that has all my contact information, and you can ask me questions about products you're using, and shares my work in Cancer Alley. And you can just Google Raising Healthy Kids, my name, David Steinman, to get the book from an independent bookseller or at Amazon.com.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, again, David, I really appreciate you carving out the time to have this conversation with me, share some of the information of this awesome book, and basically one conversation at a time, doing your part to try and help make me and you and all the people listening to this and our country healthier.
Thank you, Andrew. It's been great talking to you today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. You guys that tuned into this episode of The Code, as you know, I really, really appreciate all of your time, no matter what platform you chose to join us on. And I'm sure you can imagine how important reviews go for a podcast like this. So whether it's on Apple, Spotify, or any other platform, please scroll to the review section, drop 5 stars on there. And if you have comments or questions or other episodes and things that you want to hear about, different topics, please let me know. You'll have all my contact information there in the show notes. But again, I'm Dr. Andrew Fix with The Code, and we hope to catch you on another episode here in the future. We'll see you later.